Namaste and welcome to Yogi Krish Healing. We have very often heard of words like generational trauma, and there are many instances, many spiritual discourses that talk about how to heal from these generational traumas. But more recently, I think somewhere from the mid 20th century, there's an entire branch of science that has studied this. Is there something called as generational trauma? And this science is called epigenetics. And what they have found is this: that while we inherit the DNA from both our parents, we also inherit, at least in part, some of their traumas. How does this work? Assume I had an extremely traumatic experience, but that trauma does not inherently change my DNA sequence. But what it does is it will change how that DNA sequence is read. Parts of our genes will get turned on, part of our genes will get turned off. The way it is read will shift in a manner where it becomes self-preservative, better for survival, offering us protection in some form or the other. That is what trauma does. And assume that somebody who has had these kind of traumatic experiences in their life, they grow up, get married, and have kids. That genetic sequence and the way that it is read does get transferred to the offsprings in many cases. So trauma does get transferred from generation to generation, not in the form of the DNA sequence, but in terms of how that sequence is read. And a huge part of healing and the healing work that we are supposed to do is essentially this. Majority of the times, we put a curtain on our traumas. We don't go back to it, ignore it, assume that it does not exist. And the behavioral patterns that these shifts in sequence, the shifts in reading this genetic sequence that occurs remains with us, causes energetic blockages within us. But when we learn our lessons, or simply the act of observing our traumas and opening ourselves up to fully accept these traumas, is the beginning of the recovery process. Not to ignore it, not to put a curtain over it, but to simply observe and accept. And in the next phase, you essentially start working to learn the lessons that the traumatic experiences were supposed to teach you, or learn to release it. It could have simply been situations and circumstances that affected you. Maybe it was a war, maybe it was a famine, maybe it was a drought. Maybe it was some form of violence that you had no control over. It was all situations and circumstances, and that deeply affected you. But if you go and observe it, and simply through this act of observation, accept that you had this experience over which you had no control, you slowly start to release it and recover from it. And that is an essential part of our journey, not only to become more self aware, to heal ourselves, ensure that these energetic blockages within our system do not exist, and that our energy flows freely without any blockages, we become more healthy individuals. And that is the true spiritual path. The sages, the saints, the yogis, and the yoginis, thousands of years ago knew about this. And they did speak about granthis, which are energetic knots. They spoke about bandhas and how to untie many of these knots. They understood very well that for the energetic spiritual ascension, these blockages and these traumas that exists within us, including generational ones, needs to be untied and released. And in doing so, we open the floodgates of the energy to flow from our lower chakras to our higher chakras. And that essentially is a huge part of healing and spiritual ascension. Then there are further areas of studies, and someday, hopefully, these become more scientific and we are able to understand them even better. If we put our DNA strands together, side by side, the length of that DNA strand can go up to the sun and return back 7 times. That's the amount of information, memory that we carry as humans. And 98% of that is dormant, unconscious, subconscious, whatever you may call it. Only 2% of that is active. And when we allow all that energy to flow freely within our system, what happens is that many of these dormant parts of our DNAs get activated, what is often mentioned as light code activations. And what does that do? That enhances you, that makes you more self-aware, that makes you stronger, that heals you. And not only that, it can even bring back the power of who you are through your soul journey of ages back. Every divine gift that you have received comes back to you. Heal yourself, own your own power, and in doing so, break away these patterns that have come to you from generation to generation, so that you do not pass them on to your own children, and you spiritually ascend and become better and more evolved and conscious human beings. It's a very complex process of understanding all this, but I've tried to make it very simple. And I hope you enjoy listening to this video. If you have any questions, do leave them and I will be more than happy to respond. If you like this video, do share and subscribe, and do share it with your friends and other people. God bless. Thank you so much. Namaste.